The year is 2023. The office is on the 45th floor. Glass walls overlook the sprawling green and brown quilt of the American Midwest. A man named Frank Garrison sits at a desk made of reclaimed lumber and polished steel. He is a vice president of North American AgTech Integration, a title that didn't exist a decade ago. In front of him is a report. Holographic data floats in the air above his desk. Profitability metrics, efficiency scores, uptime percentages. His division is tracking independent operators, specifically those who consistently outperform their corporate-leased counterparts. They are looking for anomalies, outliers, farmers who are breaking the model. His finger traces a line of data. A small 3,200-acre operation in central Ohio, soybeans and corn. The numbers don't make sense. Input costs are 40% below average. Net profit per acre is nearly double the regional benchmark. Equipment maintenance costs are almost zero. He taps the screen. He brings up the owner's name. Clara Mae Thompson. The name is familiar. Thompson. He zooms in on the location. A satellite image fills the screen. He recognizes the gentle slope of the land, the sharp bend in the creek, the stand of old oak trees on the western edge. He knows that farm. Frank Garrison leans back in his chair. The leather sighs. He closes his eyes. The glass and steel office melts away. He is standing on a concrete floor. The year is 2011. The air smells of new tires and diesel. He is the manager of a John Deere dealership. A young woman is standing in front of him. Next to her is her father, an old farmer with hands like worn leather. Frank remembers the conversation. He remembers his own voice, kind, patient, certain. He remembers telling the old man he couldn't have the loan, telling him he was doing him a favor, telling him his time was over. Frank opens his eyes. He looks at the name on the screen again. Clara Mae Thompson. He looks at the profitability numbers. $1.8 million in net profit last year. No debt. He had told her father to sell, to give up, to let the professionals handle it. And they had not listened. This is a story about not listening. It's a story about the people the reports miss. The ones who fix the world with their own two hands. The ones who are told they are obsolete right before they change everything. We tell their stories here, the stories nobody else is telling, because they are the most important stories of all. If you believe that, subscribe to this channel. Stick around, because what happened on that farm will change how you look at the world. Let's go back to 2011. Clara Mae Thompson came home. She had a degree in agricultural science from Ohio State. She had a head full of ideas about soil microbiology and crop rotation. She also had $78,000 in student loan debt. The farm was struggling. Her father, John Thompson, was 68 years old. He farmed the same 300 acres his grandfather had bought in 1922. He farmed with a quiet dignity. He knew the land. He understood its moods, its needs, its secrets. But he was tired. His equipment was old. His John Deere 9600 combine was a legend, but it was a legend held together with welds and hope. The transmission was slipping. The hydraulics were weak. He spent more time fixing it than running it. The farm was barely breaking even. Some years it didn't. John felt the squeeze. Corporate farms were buying up land all around them. Vast, soulless operations run by algorithms from an office in Chicago. They farmed with massive machines that drove themselves. They saw land as a line on a spreadsheet. John saw it as a living thing, a partner, a legacy. Clara saw his exhaustion. She saw the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped at the end of the day. She made a decision. She wasn't going to take a job with some big ag company. She was going to stay. She was going to save the farm. "We can do this, Dad," she told him. "We can get a new combine. Finance it. With my degree and your experience, we can make this work." John looked at his daughter. He saw the fire in her eyes. He saw the same determination his own father had. He felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she was right. Maybe they could. So they went to the dealer. The John Deere dealership in the next county over. A massive place with acres of green and yellow machines. It looked like a military base for a war against the earth. The manager was Frank Garrison, a man they had known for years. Frank coached Little League. He was on the church council. A good man. A respected man. A certain man. They sat in his office. Clara laid out their plan. New crop rotations, cover crops to enrich the soil, a direct-to-market plan for a portion of their soybeans. She had spreadsheets, projections, data. Frank listened patiently. He smiled. He nodded. Then he looked at John, not at Clara, at John. "John," he said, his voice soft, "I've known you for 30 years. You're one of the best farmers I've ever seen. But farming has changed." He tapped their financial statements. "The margins are too thin. This new S-Series combine you want, it's $1 million machine. The payments are over $70,000 a year. You can't carry that." Clara spoke up. "Our projections show we can, with higher yields and lower input costs from regenerative practices." Frank held up a hand. He was still looking at John. He was still smiling that kind, sad smile. "John, I can't in good conscience approve this loan. I'd be setting you up to fail. These new machines, they're complex. They're not like your old 9600. They're rolling data centers. You need a support contract, a service plan. It's a whole new world." He leaned forward. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let me be honest with you. The best thing you could do right now is sell. AgriCorp is paying top dollar for land in your area. You could walk away with millions, retire, enjoy your life. Let them handle the stress. They have the scale, the capital. They can manage it properly." The room was silent. Clara felt a cold fury rise in her chest. He wasn't just refusing a loan, he was erasing them. He was telling her father his life's work was worthless, that his knowledge was obsolete, that he was no longer capable. John just sat there, his shoulders slumped. He looked old, defeated. Frank stood up. He put a hand on John's shoulder. "I'm not going to be the man who sells you the machine that bankrupts you. I'm doing this to protect you, John. You'll thank me one day." He walked them to the door. He shook John's hand. He nodded at Clara, a quick, dismissive gesture, like she was a child in the room. They drove home in silence. The silence was heavier than any words. It was the sound of a door closing, a future being denied. They sat at the old oak kitchen table, the same table where John's grandfather had signed the deed to the farm. John stared out the window. "Maybe he's right, Clara. Maybe it's time. Maybe we just can't compete anymore." Clara looked at her father. She saw the defeat in his eyes. The certainty of the kind man in the office had done its work. It had planted a seed of doubt that was more poisonous than any anger. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you. Someone who smiled while they clipped your wings. That's a different kind of fight. It's a lonely fight, because you can't fight it with anger. You can only fight it with your life. Let us know in the comments if you've ever faced that kind of certainty. And then let me tell you what happened next. Clara stood up. She walked over to the window and stood beside her father. She looked out at the fields. Their fields. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was as solid as the ground beneath their feet. "He's wrong." She turned to face him. They took everything from Grandpa during the Depression. The bank took his savings. The drought took his crops. He was left with nothing. Nothing except this. She pointed out the window, the dirt, and he said, "The dirt is enough." It was enough then, and it's enough now. We don't need their machines. We don't need their loans. We don't need their permission. The dirt is enough. John looked at his daughter. The fire was back in her eyes. But it was a different kind of fire now. It wasn't the hopeful fire of a college graduate. It was the cold, hard fire of a forge. Something had been burned away in that office, and something stronger was being made. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What do we do?" Clara smiled, a real smile, the first one all day. "We go old school," she said. The next day, she started searching, not for new combines, for old ones. She spent weeks on auction sites, forums for retired farmers. She was looking for something specific. A machine from before the age of software. A machine built of steel and grease and logic. A machine you could fix with a wrench, not a laptop. She found it in a scrapyard in Nebraska. A 1994 Case IH1688 axial flow combine. It was a wreck, rusted out, engine seized, tires rotted. The owner wanted $15,000 for it. Scrap value. Clara drove 12 hours to see it. She walked around it for an hour. John had taught her what to look for. The frame was straight. The rotor was intact. The bones were good. She paid the man in cash, money she got from selling her car, a 2010 Honda Civic she loved. She didn't hesitate. It was just a car. This was their future. They hauled the beast home on a flatbed. It looked like a dead dinosaur in their yard. Their neighbors came by to look. Some of them just shook their heads. Bill, the farmer to the north, an old friend of her father's, came over. He was in his 70s. He looked at the rusted machine. He looked at Clara. Then he looked at John. "You two have lost your minds," he said. Then he grinned. "I've got an engine hoist you can borrow." And so it began, the winter of the rebuild. November of 2011 to March of 2012. The barn became their workshop, their hospital, their sanctuary. They pulled the engine, a massive Cummins diesel. They tore it down to the block. Every piston, every bearing, every seal. Clara used her student loan money to buy the parts. She found an old service manual online, a scanned PDF, 3,000 pages long. It became her Bible. John taught her how to read the steel, how to feel the tolerances with her fingertips, how to listen for the right sounds. He couldn't do the heavy lifting anymore. His back was shot. But his knowledge was a force of nature. Generational knowledge, passed down from his father, who could fix a steam engine with a piece of wire and a prayer. They worked from dawn until long after dusk. The barn was cold. Their hands were cracked and bleeding. They drank bitter coffee and ate sandwiches standing up. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They were speaking a language of wrenches and sockets, of torque specs and timing marks, of shared purpose. The community watched. The doubters would drive by slowly. They'd see the lights on in the barn late at night. They'd talk at the co-op. Poor John Thompson. His daughter is running him into the ground, trying to make a go of it with that piece of junk. She should have taken that corporate job. The supporters brought them food. Bill brought over a portable heater. Another neighbor dropped off a set of heavy-duty jack stands. They didn't say much. They just left the items by the barn door. Small acts of faith. In March, the work was done. The engine was rebuilt. The hydraulics were replaced. The electrical system was rewired from scratch. Clara had painted it herself, not the factory red, a deep, defiant blue, her own color. It was time. John stood back. Clara climbed into the cab. She took a deep breath. She turned the key. The starter groaned. The engine coughed. Once. Twice. And then it roared to life. A deep, throaty rumble that shook the barn walls. A sound of thunder and iron and resurrection. John Thompson closed his eyes. He wasn't a religious man, but that sound was the sweetest hymn he had ever heard. Clara engaged the thresher. The machine vibrated. It hummed. It was alive. She looked at her father through the dusty glass of the cab. He was crying. Not from sadness, from pride, from relief, from the fierce, quiet joy of proving a kind man wrong. That fall, they harvested their 300 acres of soybeans. The blue combine worked flawlessly. Clara ran it. John ran the grain cart. They were a team. Their yield was 62 bushels per acre, slightly above the county average. Their neighbors, with their million-dollar smart combines, got 65. But here's the number that mattered. The number Frank Garrison and his spreadsheets could never understand. Clara and John's cost of production was $250 per acre. Their neighbors' was over $500. They paid for the machine, the software subscriptions, the GPS unlock fees, the dealer service contracts. Clara and John had paid in cash for a machine they owned, outright. A machine they could fix themselves with a wrench. Their net profit that year was 3 times what it had been the year before. They paid off a chunk of Clara's student loans. They put a new roof on the house. They bought the best seed for the next season. They didn't take a vacation. They didn't buy a new truck. They invested every dollar back into the farm, back into the dirt, because the dirt is enough. And this is where the story gets bigger than one family and one farm. Let me tell you about the next 10 years. 2013. Clara bought 80 acres from a retiring farmer to their east, paid in cash. 2014. She bought another 120 acres to the south. The owner had been bankrupted by a hailstorm and couldn't make his equipment payments. Paid in cash. 2015. She rebuilt a second machine, a 1998 John Deere 8400 tractor. She bought it at auction for $25,000. A new one would have cost $400,000. She and John spent the winter bringing it back to life. They painted it the same defiant blue. 2016. She bought 200 more acres, paid in cash. Her farm was now 700 acres. Her yields were climbing. Her regenerative practices were restoring the soil. The organic matter in her fields was triple that of her neighbors. Her land held water better during dry spells. It drained better during floods. The dirt was getting healthier, richer, more alive. The doubters were getting quieter. They saw her new grain bins going up. They saw the semi-trucks leaving her farm loaded with grain. They heard the numbers at the co-op. They didn't understand it. How could she be doing so well with that old junk? Frank Garrison drove by her farm sometimes. He was a regional manager now. He'd be driving to a meeting or a dealer event. He'd see the blue machines in the field. He'd see the expanding acreage. He'd feel a strange tightness in his chest, something he couldn't quite name. He told himself he had done the right thing. He had followed the rules, the data. He was a professional. But the blue machines kept running. The farm kept growing. And John Thompson was still there, walking his fields, looking prouder than Frank had ever seen him. 2018. Clara bought another 500 acres, paid in cash. 2020. She bought another 1,000, paid in cash. She was now one of the largest independent operators in the county. She hired a full-time mechanic, a young man from the local high school who loved old iron. She taught him everything John had taught her. She paid him well. She was building a team, a new generation that understood the old ways. By 2022, Clara Mae Thompson farmed 3,200 acres, all of it paid for. All of her equipment was pre-2000, all of it owned outright. All of it painted that same defiant blue. She had no debt. None. In a world built on credit, she was a ghost, an impossibility. A quiet rebellion made of soil and steel and self-sufficiency. And then came the harvest of 2022, and the moment that turned a quiet success story into a legend. It started with the rain, a forecast for 5 straight days of thunderstorms, starting on Wednesday. It was Monday morning. Every farmer in the county was in a panic. They had 2 days to get their soybeans in, 2 days to save their year's income. The fields were filled with the roar of new machines, green ones, red ones, yellow ones, million-dollar marvels of technology. Clara's young neighbor, a man named Tom, was running a brand new John Deere X9 combine, a machine so advanced it had its own Wi-Fi hotspot. He was cutting beans at a furious pace. At noon on Monday, the machine just stopped. The engine went silent. The lights went out. In the middle of the field, Tom tried to restart it. Nothing. An error code flashed on the touchscreen display. Error 504.31. Unauthorized ECU state. Please contact your authorized dealer for service. Tom called the dealer. The service manager was swamped. Every farmer in 3 counties was calling. He told Tom he could send a tech out. On Thursday. Tom felt the blood drain from his face. Thursday? The crop will be ruined by Thursday. I need someone now. The service manager sighed. Look, Tom, I've got 20 guys ahead of you, and even if I could send someone, it's not a simple fix. That code requires a proprietary software reset. Our tech has to plug in his laptop, connect to the mothership in Moline, and get a new authorization key. There's a charge for that. How much? Tom asked. His voice was tight. $8,200. Tom was silent. $8,000? For a software reset? It's not just a reset, the manager said, his voice defensive. It's a diagnostic fee, a software license recalibration, a service call fee. It all adds up. Tom looked out at his field, half-harvested. He looked up at the sky. The clouds were gathering on the horizon. He had a $1.2 million machine, and it was being held hostage by a line of code. He was desperate. He thought of his loan payments, his family, and then he thought of the blue combine in the next field over, the one that was still running. He swallowed his pride. He called Clara. He explained the situation. He expected her to laugh, or to say, "I told you so." She didn't. She just said, "I'll be right over." She pulled up in her old farm truck. She climbed into the cab of his silent, high-tech monster. She looked at the error code. She didn't touch the screen. She just looked. She got on her phone. She called her dad. John was retired now, living in a small house on the edge of the farm, but he still answered on the first ring. She described the code. She described the situation. John was quiet for a moment. Then he chuckled. Unauthorized ECU state, huh? That's a fancy way of saying the computer doesn't like something. They've put a digital lock on a physical machine. Remember that old 9600 we had? The one where the grain moisture sensor went bad? The alarm would scream, but the machine would keep running. You could choose to ignore it. These new ones, they don't give you a choice. The computer sees a fault, it shuts everything down, even if the fault is in a non-critical sensor. It's not about safety, it's about control. "So what do I do?" Clara asked. He told her. He gave her a set of instructions, based not on software diagrams, but on his fundamental understanding of how a harvesting machine works, of what it needs to function: air, fuel, hydraulic pressure. He told her the computer was just a gatekeeper, and every gate has a key, or a way around the fence. Clara hung up. She turned to Tom. "Do you have a basic wrench set?" He looked at her, confused. "Yeah, in my truck." She went to her own truck. She came back with a small, worn wooden box. Inside, nestled in felt, was a set of antique wrenches. They were her grandfather's, the physical artifact of their family's survival. She chose a simple half-inch wrench. She crawled under the combine. Tom watched, bewildered. She found what her father had described: a bundle of wires leading from a sensor on the clean grain elevator into the main wiring harness. The sensor measured the final moisture content of the harvested soybeans, a useful piece of data, but not essential for the machine to physically operate. The sensor had likely failed, and the software was programmed to treat that failure as a catastrophic event, a full shutdown, forcing a service call, forcing a payment. Clara didn't try to fix the sensor. She didn't have to. She used the wrench to loosen a single bolt on a small grounding plate nearby. She carefully rerouted a specific wire from the sensor harness and attached it to the grounding plate, creating a simple bypass loop. She was feeding the computer a false signal, a signal that said, "All clear, everything is fine." She was lying to the machine to make it tell the truth that it was perfectly capable of running. She tightened the bolt. She crawled out from under the combine. She was covered in dust. "Okay," she said. "Try it now." Tom looked at her. He looked at the tiny wrench in her hand. He looked at his $1 million machine. It seemed impossible. He climbed into the cab. He turned the key. The dashboard lit up. The error code was gone. He pushed the ignition button. The massive engine roared to life. The combine shuddered, and the header began to turn. It was working. Tom just sat there for a full minute, listening to the sound. He got out of the cab. He walked over to Clara. He was speechless. How did you do that?" "My father taught me how to think," she said. "Not just how to operate." Tom pulled out his checkbook. "What do I owe you?" "That dealer was going to charge me over $8,000. Clara shook her head. She put her grandfather's wrench back in its box. "You don't owe me anything, but you need to ask yourself a question. Who owns this machine? You, or the company you bought it from?" She got in her truck and drove away, leaving Tom standing in his field, next to his running combine, with a question that would change his life. The story of what Clara did spread like wildfire, first to the neighbors, then through the whole county. The quiet woman with the blue machines had faced down the dragon, and she had won, with a half-inch wrench. Other farmers started calling her, not just for advice, for help. A tractor that wouldn't start because of a seat sensor fault. A planter that wouldn't unfold because of a GPS subscription error. One by one, she helped them. She never charged a dime. She would drive over, listen to the problem, call her dad, and together they would figure out the logic, the mechanical truth hidden inside the digital lie. She started holding workshops in her barn on Saturday mornings, teaching the younger farmers basic diagnostics, how to read wiring diagrams, how to bypass non-essential sensors, how to reclaim ownership of their own equipment. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a movement. It was just knowledge, passed from one farmer to another, the way it had always been. She was creating a new kind of legacy, not just of land and profit, but of independence, of freedom. In 2023, she used some of her profits to endow a scholarship at the local community college, the John Thompson Scholarship for Agricultural Mechanics, for students who wanted to learn how to fix things with their hands. Her father was there at the ceremony. He didn't give a speech. He just stood next to his daughter, and he smiled. Which brings us back to that office, on the 45th floor. Frank Garrison is still looking at the report, at the name, Clara May Thompson. He pulls up another file. Internal service reports from his old sales region. He sees a 15% drop in high-margin software-related service calls over the past year. He sees a note from a regional manager. Growing trend of farmers in this area performing unauthorized repairs and bypasses. Seems to be a local movement centered around an independent operator named Thompson. Frank closes the file. He understands now. The tightness in his chest all those years. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't anger. It was the feeling of being wrong. Profoundly, fundamentally wrong. He hadn't been protecting John Thompson that day in his office. He hadn't been kind. He had been certain. And his certainty was a prison. A prison he had tried to lock them in. But they had walked out. And they had built a world where they no longer needed his keys. He looks at the screen. At the farm that shouldn't exist. At the profits that shouldn't be possible. He thinks of the old man. He thinks of the determined young woman. He thinks of the half-inch wrench that did the work of an $8,200 software package. And Frank Garrison, Vice President of North American Ag Tech Integration, feels something he hasn't felt since he was a child. He feels obsolete. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is being told they can't. Someone is being told their knowledge is worthless, that their way is over. They are being told this by a kind person, a reasonable person, a person who is certain they are right. This story is for them. It's a reminder that the most powerful tool you will ever own is your own mind. The most valuable inheritance is not money, but knowledge. And that sometimes, the most sophisticated system in the world can be defeated by a simple truth, and a father's wrench. If this story means something to you, subscribe to the channel. Join a community that believes in these stories. In the comments below, tell us about a time you found a simple, hands-on solution to a complex problem. And share this video with one person who needs to be reminded of the power they hold in their own two hands. Because the world is fixed by people like Clara Thompson, quietly, patiently, one bolt at a time.